Pesach is now 1 week and a half. A week and a half away. Friday night the 30th. And obviously we've been going through the different elements of Pesach. What I want to talk about this year is not the entire Seder, but two parts of the Seder, specifically Karpas and Yachatz. These are the two these are the second two interactive elements that we interact with by the Seder plate. The first was, well, actually it's the first time we actually interact with the Seder plate. First we started with Kadesh, which obviously is making Kiddush, sanctifying the festival, and Karpas and Yachatz is the first time we interact with the Seder plate. Last week we spoke about the meanings and the way the Seder plate is the format for both utilizing it throughout the Seder, but as well as applying it to your own life, the different elements with the intellect and the emotions and the meanings of the 6 parts of the Seder plate on top of the Kaira. Now I want to talk about Karpas and Yachatz, the first time you interact with the Seder plate itself. So Karpas is where we take the root vegetable, the potato, the onion, or the parsley, we dip in salt water, and we make the bracha bari pri adama, and then we eat it. Obviously, when you make the bracha, you have in mind also for the mara that you'll make later, that you'll eat later. There is a bracha you make anyway in mara, because there's a potential assumption that between the mara and the Karpas, we have magid in between, and more than likely you will have forgotten that you had in mind the mara, and therefore make the bracha again, al chilas mara, having in mind the fact you made bari pri adama. If not, then you have to make a bracha again. So, the Karpas, the basic of the Karpas is you take the fruit, this vegetable, you dip it into the salt water and you eat it. So the classic reasoning why we dip into salt water, the classic reasoning that we dip into salt water is the salt water represents the bitter tears that the Jews cried in Egypt from the bitter slavery. And we use potato or onion and parsley as it's a very lowly vegetable. It's underground, it's very low, it's not seen as a luxury, so to speak, it's seen as a base sustenance, representing the Jews were very low in their spiritual status, as well as they were a slave nation, they were at the bottom of the food chain, so to speak, in human hierarchy. And therefore we mix the two forms of enslavement, being the fact that that it was a very lowly nation, with the fact that they were enslaved and they were crying very bitterly, to symbolize our past history of slavery in Egypt, and the fact that we went to Exodus to become a nation of Israel. That's one level. Being that there are multiple different levels to the Torah and to the customs we do, let's go another level. Another level is that Karpas and this whole element works together. The root vegetables, potato and onion, they come from the ground. Not just from the ground, it's not just like lettuce or other vegetables which you can use different parts of them, or they're just from the ground, but actually onions and potatoes come from underneath the ground. And to use them, you have to wash them off with water. You can't take a vegetable from the ground, you can't take a potato from the ground or onion from the ground and just straight away use it. You have to clean it, you have to wash it off, that's just the preparation before you even use it in cooking. So that's one concept. The dipping in the salt water is another element, and that is the Hebrew word for dipping is tovel. You matbil it. Swap the letters around, tes veis lamed, which is tev tovel, or matbil tes veis lamed, or mentes veis lamed is matbil, or Sispel can swap the words to spell out base tes lamed, which is bittul, nullification. So another level is the whole idea of Karpas is we take ourselves, which part of us is this lowly vegetable, i.e. the idea of humility. We humble ourselves on par with a vegetable, and we dip it inside the salt water. We nullify, we bitter ourselves to godliness, to that there is something greater than ourselves. That's another level. Let's go another level. What's the idea of dipping, of toveling oneself in water? Why does tevilah, going to mikveh, tevilah have to do with, why is it so important, and why is it associated with the idea of bittul? Why does tevilah associate the idea of reunification, purifying oneself? Women go to mikveh once a month, many men go to mikveh either every day or before Shabbos or or before Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. The Kohen Gadol would go to mikveh to purify themselves. What's the association with purifying yourself? That you dip yourself in water. So this goes back. There's different sources for it. One of the sources is when the world itself was purified. When by the Great Flood, it rained for 40 days, 40 nights. Again, the idea of 40. Which we'll talk about in a minute. The mikveh itself needs to be memsar. It needs to be a certain measurement of 40, I think 40 liters, or I don't know exactly know the measurement of a sar, but 40 of these sars. I'm sure Google will help out with the sources of that amount. And therefore the mikveh and the idea of purifying oneself is associated with the number 40. What's the connection? Sorry, I've gone the wrong way. The mikveh needs to be memsar, which is associated with the fact that it rained for 40 days, 40 nights, and that Medrash says that the amount of water on the earth during the Great Flood was 40 times the mass of the earth. That's Medrash based, and therefore we see that this memsar is related to the concept of purification, especially with the world was purified from the issues that happened pre-Mabul, all the negativity that happened. The reason why the flood came, was to wash away this negativity using this process of 40. So where does this process of 40 come from? What's the correlation between 40 with purification? And that comes from the process of a fetus from conception to becoming a fetus. The sages tell us is 40 days. It takes 40 days from conception to this seedling, whatever you want to call it, to becoming an actual fetus. And those 40 days is inside its mother's womb. This pre-fetus is inside its mother's womb, becoming an entity for itself. And therefore the whole idea of going to mikvah is reconnecting with that primordial birth process, that water, that prime source of life, just like a fetus inside its mother's womb for 40 days. When one goes to mikvah, which is within the memsar, within that process of 40, within the corresponding to the world which had the flood for 40 days, 40 nights of rain, and the water being 40 times the mass of the earth, when you go to mikveh, you reconnect with that prime source of water. That water is associated with life, with godliness. We said before that water is Mayim Chaim, which is connected to Torah, and therefore when we dip in mikveh, we can reconnect to the Torah and reconnect to that life source. That's what it's symbolic of. And therefore when we come out, it's the idea of birth, reunification, rejuvenation of a new entity coming out of the water, coming out of the mikveh, just like this embryo, this egg, becomes a fetus, becoming a new entity for itself. And that's why the whole idea of bittul, where we take this potato or this onion and we matbil it, we dip it into the salt water, or otherwise known as we bittul, swapping around the words, we bittul it. We nullify this potato corresponding to the lowly self. We nullify our lowly self to something far greater than ourselves, which is godliness, reconnecting to the ultimate source, i.e. Torah, godliness, spirituality, coming out on the other side as a new entity. And therefore all these different all these different elements connect together. And that's why we dip the karpas, this lowly vegetable that needs to be prepared. It comes from deep in the earth, or not deep, it comes from the earth. It's coarse, it's lowly, it's base. We wash it off, we prepare it, and then obviously in the case of the potato, we boil it. We then dip it into the water, we matbil it, or we bittle it into something far greater than itself, i.e. symbolic of us dipping ourselves into, or nullifying ourselves into the water of Torah, into the water of life, nullifying and connecting to the prime source of godliness or spirituality that created this world in the beginning of time, starting out afresh, anew, and beginning our journey, in the case of Pesach, journeying onto breaking our boundaries, leaving behind our limitations, to becoming something far greater than when we first started, or far better in character and self than when we first started the Seder to begin with. So that's the lesson of the Karpas in Zoltavas and salt water, and the different elements and different levels of Karpas. Any questions on that? No? Okay, so that's Karpas.